Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. This is Les Smith. I'm with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. And it is my pleasure to welcome you all this evening to this evening's Eaton Rapids Municipal Landfill PFAS investigation. We have an agenda for you this evening, which I would like to go over quickly with you so we can get on with this evening's presentation. Again, I'm Les with the Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. Have a couple of staff people that are on with me. Jennifer Dixon, who is also with our department. Also, other staff that will be presenting tonight, Stephanie Kamer with Eagle, and Mr. Gary Clace with the Department of Health and Human Services, and Rebecca Taylor also with Eagle. We will be covering three different topics this evening. The first will be a PFAS 101 discussion, followed by a PFAS and health discussion, and then finally a summary of the investigation surrounding the Eaton Rapids Municipal Landfill. Following those presentations, we will go into a question and answer session, and there's ways that you can provide your questions throughout the presentations. Before I get to that, I just want to let you know that we have a couple of housekeeping items for you. All the lines, your phone lines and your computer lines are muted, which means that we can't hear you, but you should be able to hear us during this presentation. And we are currently recording the webinar. So you will be able to view the webinar again at a later date and also to share it with neighbors. Before we get into the presentation, I just wanted to let you know if you have a question, you can use the question and answer box, which is located at the bottom of your screen. You may also raise your hand. Again, when we get to the question and answer session, you can raise your hand. There's a hand icon that is also located at the bottom of the screen. And finally, if there are anyone on the phone, which I'm checking to find out, if there are any individuals on the phone and you would like to raise your hand to speak, you would want to press *9. That is for our individuals who may be listening by phone only. And with that, just check and see how we're doing on participants. And we have about 6 attendees. So with that, I guess we're ready to move into the rest of the webinar. So with that, I'd like to introduce Stephanie Kamer with the Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. She will give us a presentation dealing with the PFAS 101. Take it away, Stephanie.
Okay, thanks, Wes. Yeah, I'm Stephanie Kamer. I work in the Water Resources Division for Eagle. I serve under MPART as the Lansing area regional lead for the MPART sites in the Lansing area. And I also, for water, serve and I'm a manager for an emerging pollutants section where we work on PFAS and wastewater discharges for both municipal and industrial industries. So if you can advance to the next slide. So my role today is to kind of give an overview of PFAS and what MPART is. So MPART stands for the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team. It was formed under Executive Order 2019-03 due to the potential for statewide contamination from PFAS and the impact to public health. It was formed to ensure that Michigan had an efficient and effective response across all the various agencies that are involved. It's an advisory body charged with coordinating the actions of key state departments that are responsible for environmental and natural resources protection, agriculture, public health, military installations, fire departments, and commercial airports. It's responsible also to coordinate with local and federal agencies and stakeholders to promote consistency, share information, and ensure that we're leveraging our resources that we have to the best of our ability. The MPART is really the reason why we've been so successful in Michigan in rapidly identifying and reducing exposures of PFAS and it's enabled us to take a very comprehensive, data-driven, and science-based approach to this issue. Next slide. So you might be asking, you know, what is PFAS? We use a lot of acronyms. It's per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. It's actually encompasses a very large class of chemical compounds. Today, we know of over 5,000 different compounds that we call collectively as PFAS. They are all man-made chemicals. They're not found naturally in the environment. They have one of the strongest bonds in chemistry. So there's a very strong carbon-fluorine bond that is very persistent and does not break down. Sometimes they're referred to as forever chemicals because of how persistent they can be. They are surfactants, and they can act as detergents, wetting agents, emulsifiers, foaming agents, and dispersants. So they have a lot of really wide range of uses, and we'll kind of go into some of those uses in the next slide. They have very unique characteristics that made them attractive to use. They don't like water or oil, but they exist kind of in the interface between. They've been around since the 1940s. And while, like I said, there's thousands of compounds out there, we're kind of in the beginning stages. It's an emerging pollutant, and we really only focus on a few right now. So next slide, please. So PFAS uses, as I said, you know, the traits about PFAS made them very attractive in several different industrial, commercial processes and products. You can find them in apparel. So if you think of things that we want to be water resistant, like Gore-Tex, there are Teflon coatings on pans. They have been found in herbicides and pesticides. They were in food packaging. So, you know, if you went to a fast food restaurant and you got a hamburger, they were used as a coating in your food wrapper so that the grease from the hamburger wouldn't drip through and fall on your lap. They've been found in dental floss and Rain-X. So they persistently used, and they've been, like I said, around for 70 plus years. Next slide, please. So why are we concerned about PFAS? And one of the reasons is because they were so widespread and so heavily used. You know, we do find them when we look for PFAS compounds. We do find them, including in areas like Antarctica, where you know we don't have manufacturing happening up there. They don't break down easily, so that makes them very persistent and very hard to get rid of in the environment. There's incomplete science. You know, this is an emerging pollutant, so we're still developing the science around these compounds and what it means, and we're still developing regulation to allow us to address the compounds in a protective way. They are bioaccumulative, so they can build up in our bodies and in things that we may eat, like fish. And so we want to investigate them and understand them and how they're present. There is some indication that there may be health effects of PFAS, and I'm not going to get into that because we have Gary Place on the phone from DHHS, and he does a much better job of explaining the health concerns. So I'll let him do that as part of his presentation. Next slide, please. So this diagram, and unless I don't know, do we have anybody that called in? So I can go ahead and just try to.
Stephanie, this is Jennifer. We don't have anybody that called in right now, so you should be good to go to just keep this discussion based on what people can see on the screen.
Okay, great. So this diagram is something that we use to help explain the cycling of PFAS in the environment. And as you can see, you know, there's many different ways that PFAS is introduced in the environment, but the main point of this slide is to show that, you know, once it's introduced, it's going to be cycling throughout. So if it's introduced from an industry who may have used it as a, you know, foam suppressant as part of their process, their wastewater then can either get discharged directly to a river or stream, or it can go to a wastewater treatment plant. That wastewater treatment plant is not going to remove PFAS, but it's going to instead pass it through its discharge to the river or stream. It can accumulate in biosolids. Sometimes sludge from the treatment plant might go to a landfill. Once it's in the landfill, along with other products that are taken to the landfill, like industrial sludges and commercial products that might have PFAS in it, the landfill generates leachate, which will have PFAS, and that leachate is sent back to the treatment plant. So there's a cycling that's happening. And really our charge at Eagle is to identify where we find it in elevated concentrations and try to break that cycle, trying to sequester it and remove it from the environment. So next slide, please. So this map shows a map of Michigan, and it has some sites located. This can be found on our MPART website. And these are all the PFAS sites. This slide itself is a little bit outdated. We had new MCLs that were passed, new regulations that were passed on Monday. So this has been since updated since yesterday to include new criteria. But basically, it shows all the different sites that we're investigating where we found groundwater at a site that's above our current criteria. And so this is one of those sites. And we just got word today, this is actually 138th site that's been added. So this site is not alone. There's many others out there. They include military installation, landfills, industrial sites, and airports. And while you might say, wow, that's a lot of sites that we have, I don't want you to think that that means that we're more contaminated in Michigan than any other state. It just means that Michigan's been more proactive at trying to identify locations where PFAS has impacted groundwater than most other states out there. We're continuing to investigate additional potential sites. So, while we're at 138 today, we expect that this number over time will grow as we continue investigations. We prioritize our investigations based on potential impacts to drinking water. That's our #1 goal with our investigations, to make sure we're protecting public health. When we discover a site, all of the MPART agencies in the state, we work closely with the local health departments and officials to develop a plan for ensuring that we're informing residents and investigating private wells and other water uses, which is why we're here today. So last slide, please. So the last thing I want to talk about is the Citizens Advisory Work Group. This work group was formed under MPART. It's made up of residents from impacted communities from PFAS. It's the fundamental purpose of the work group is to advise and assist MPART to partner proactively with PFAS impacted citizens and communities throughout Michigan, recognizing that the ideas and perspectives of an engaged citizenry are essential to MPART in fulfilling its duty to protect public health. So we want to make sure we're inclusive and getting the best information from our citizens. There is a webpage on the PFAS response website for the Citizens Advisory Work Group, and it includes the charter, meeting information, and members. And if anyone is interested in becoming a member, all you need to do is submit a registration form found on the Citizen Advisory Work Group webpage, and all registrations are approved for participation. And that's all I had, so I'll pass it on to Gary Clace with DHHS.
Thank you, Stephanie. All right, as Stephanie said, my name is Gary Clace, and I'm a toxicologist with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. Next slide, please. All right, so working together with Eagle, your state and local health departments are here to investigate the health risks that may or may not be facing your community and find effective ways to address them in a timely manner. To do this, Eagle helps conduct the site investigation, and they generate the data that we need to assess the risks that may be posed at this site, while the health departments will evaluate the data and determine what, if anything, needs to be done to protect residents. Next slide. Now, PFAS chemicals are not new, and they are not rare. These are widespread chemicals that have been around for more than 50 years, used broadly in industry, commerce, and residential applications. They've been used to resist stains in clothing and carpets and upholstery. They've been used in food packaging and many other applications. These chemicals have been all around us for a long time. Today, our primary concern is finding contaminated drinking water and fish and wildlife and eliminating those routes of exposures to people. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, PFAS have been around for a long time, and essentially everybody has been exposed to these chemicals over the course of their lifetimes. The good news is that some of the major PFAS chemicals have been phased out of use, and what we're seeing is that blood levels of PFAS in the population have been coming down. So while many people are just now finding out about these chemicals, in actuality, a lot of progress has already been made to identify and eliminate the risks of PFAS. Next slide, please. Now, we're concerned about exposure to PFAS because it can potentially cause a number of health effects in humans, although many of these effects are still being studied, and a lot of them are rare even among those people who have been exposed. As you can see here, exposure to PFAS can potentially reduce a woman's chance of becoming pregnant or increase blood pressure during pregnancy. Some PFAS chemicals may also affect the thyroid, cholesterol, the immune system, and possibly increase the risks of some kinds of cancer. Of course, our hope is to eliminate PFAS exposures and prevent these negative outcomes altogether. And with that, I'll pass it back to Rebecca Taylor at Eagle to tell us more about the investigation at Eaton Rapids. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Rebecca Taylor. I'm a department analyst with Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy for Lansing District Office. I'm a project manager for this facility, which has been investigated by the City of Eaton Rapids voluntarily over many, many years. And so let's talk about this particular landfill and why we are concerned about PFAS. Next slide, please. So this particular landfill is located near the southwest corner of the City of Eaton Rapids. It's on Hogsback Road, north of Spicerville Highway. And one of the primary features of concern is that Springbrook surrounds this landfill, and it flows to the north and joins with Hobart Drain, which eventually flows into the Grand River. Before this property became a landfill, it was mined for gravel. And often in these cases, old gravel pits tend to become landfills because of a convenient hole. At this particular landfill, there are 14 groundwater and 5 surface water sampling points that we've looked at for PFAS. Landfill is producing methane, and there are 3 functioning methane vents to prevent buildup of methane and explosive issues. There is a solar array in the center of the landfill, which is producing power as we speak. And there are about 20 residential wells within a quarter mile of this particular landfill. Next slide, please. At this landfill, the site history in brief is that during the 1960s and 1970s, that's when the facility was accepting waste, which is a prime period for manufacture of consumer products at PFAS. And after the landfill was done accepting waste, it was regraded and capped with clay in 1980. The City of Eaton Rapids did install groundwater monitoring wells and methane vents after the landfill was capped over a period of time. And the groundwater has been monitored by looking at concentrations of contamination in monitoring wells for 41 years, which is a very long time. Methane gas monitoring at the vents has been going on for about 17 years. And over the years, because there were residential wells, deep residential wells near the landfill, Eagle has looked at landfill-related contamination, not PFAS, over the years. So far, there's no direct link of any contamination from the landfill to these residential wells. Next slide. So this slide is rather difficult to see. The primary purpose is if you're looking at the pink areas, the pink areas indicate where PFAS was detected. I'm apologizing for my phone that just went off. And where PFAS was detected over the previous criteria of 70 parts per trillion with 1 PFOS added to another PFAS. That basically is PFOA plus PFOS. So the landfill itself, you can see the solar array in the middle of it, and the red line indicates the property boundary, but the landfill cells are mainly located on the west side of the landfill. So in the green, that's where PFOS was detected, PFAS, PFOS plus PFOS, below the 70 parts per trillion criteria. So this map will be updated later on to reflect the current criteria. But it's just to give you an indication of where the PFOS and PFOA were located, which may pose a risk to area wells. The map also has some indication of where some of these residential wells are. Basically, where you see a house, that's where there's a residential well. Some of the residential wells are deep, and a few of them are shallow. Next slide, please. So the purpose of this particular slide is just simply to show the concentrations of the PFOA plus PFOS, which were found in shallow monitoring wells. So the groundwater monitoring wells are quite shallow, roughly about 15 to 18 feet deep. And those concentrations are posted on the side, just for instance, where the highest concentration was found at 141 part per trillion of PFOA plus PFOS, and that well is only about 15, 16 feet deep. And the other wells and methane vents that happen to have groundwater in them that were sampled were also very shallow. So that's the purpose of that slide. Also, before we leave, the SG1 that you see in the South Pond and the pond, those are 5 surface water sampling locations that were looked at by the city of Eaton Rapids last April. And of all the 5 sampling locations, only 1 location, that was a pond near the landfill, a dugout pond near the landfill, showed PFOA, that it was present, but it was below a criteria of concern. So there is some PFOA out in the landfill. PFOS is the constituent that PFOS that is of concern for bioaccumulation in wildlife. So we haven't seen that particular PFAS show up in the surface water yet. Next slide. Okay, this one is a little bit tough, but this is sort of what the Department of Public Health is looking at when we decide which wells may be vulnerable to PFAS contamination, which ones may not be vulnerable to PFAS contamination. This well is sort of typical because it's deep, it's set down into the bedrock, and it has at least 2 clay layers between where the shallow PFAS contamination is and where the drinking water is being drawn from. So this is a good indication that there may not be an issue at this particular site. However, there are some cases in which some of these older wells, when they're constructed, the protective construction materials break down over time. So it's possible that contamination can migrate from the surface. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen occasionally, which is one reason why we're concerned for adjacent wells that might be right next to the landfill. There's possibility that contamination may creep down from the surface. So some of the area wells that we looked at when we did our initial survey with the health department did not have any of these well logs associated with them. It had no information whatsoever. Typically, these wells are screened in the glacial materials and are shallower, and so therefore they're of a higher concern. Next slide. So we're looking at sampling 8 residential wells initially, and we selected the wells we thought are most at risk, and that would include the 4 residential wells that we've been looking at all these years, and to collect PFAS samples from these wells to make sure that PFAS hasn't found a way down to the wells. PFAS does travel a bit differently in the environment than some of these other contamination. And there are 4 residential wells near the landfill that we'll be looking at for the PFAS. These are set deep. And then there are 4 residential wells over on Whittam Road that we don't have much information on. We're presuming that the residential wells being used for drinking water are shallow, and they're in the general direction of groundwater flow. Groundwater flow from the landfill is moving sort of regularly. It moves to the west and to the northwest primarily. So that's what we're going to be doing. We sent out access request forms to the 8 residents, And if you have joined and you haven't sent in your access request form to us, to the health department, we would appreciate that you do so. And Eagle will be doing some follow-up outreach to folks to get permission to sample residential wells. So once the residential well samples the results are in, those results will be immediately communicated to the folks who had their well sampled. And that's something that partnered with the Barry Eaton District Health Department, and they will be working with residents and the Michigan Department of Human Health and Services if any PFAS is found, and there's an action plan as far as what needs to be done and how quickly it needs to be done, depending on what the results are. We're hoping that we're not going to see any PFAS in anybody's residential wells, but we are going to look. So that's pretty much all I have to say. And if there are any questions, Les can tell you how to ask them.
All right, thank you, Rebecca, and thank you to Stephanie and Gary for your wonderful presentation. I'll give you guys a little break here to get water while I talk about the instructions on how we're going to do the question and answer session. For our attendees that came on a little bit later after we started, you have the ability to ask questions in the question and answer box. There's an icon at the bottom of the screen for you with the Q&A that you can click on and type in a question, and our panelists will be ready to hopefully answer the questions that you have provided. Another way you can also is to raise your hand. There's a hand icon at the bottom of the screen. If you raise your hand, myself or Jennifer will be looking for that, and we will do our best to mute your line so you can verbally ask your question of the panelists. Our panelists again, well, here again the instructions that I shared earlier. You can use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I can use the hand icon at the bottom of the screen. And if anyone has joined us on the phone, you can type *9 on your phone to electronically raise your hand so that we would see you, and we will be able to unmute your line so you can speak as well. And with that, if our panelists could join us, our panelists again will be Stephanie, Gary, and Rebecca. Stephanie talked about PFAS and where we encounter it in our in the environment and our just everyday consumable products. Gary talked about the potential health effects associated with PFAS exposure, and Rebecca talked about the investigation around the landfill. So at this point now, we want to open up the floor for questions from our attendees. And Jennifer, do you have any questions?
So we did have, it's not really a question, it's more of a comment. Casey Swanson from Barry Eaton District Health Department just wanted to remind residents that they can send their PFAS sampling request forms to this specific email address, and I'll read it aloud, so if anyone wants to write it down, they can. And I'm also going to be sharing a phone number with that as well. So that address is mhenry@bedhd.org. So it's M as in Mary, H as in hat, E as in elephant, N as in Nancy, R as in red, Y as in yellow, at B as in boy, E as in elephant, D as in dog, H as in health, D as in department.org, so org. And the phone number associated with that, if you don't have an email and you feel more comfortable calling, the phone number is 517-541-2673. So if you call that number or send an email to that, to Casey there, they will definitely help you get what you need done. So that was the only question that we have so far, Les, and I don't see any hands raised right now, but if people have more questions, definitely feel free to get those in.
Okay. Yeah, we have, what did I see, 8 attendees. So for our panelists, does anyone have any other, anything else they would like to share with our attendees while we're waiting for a question or two? Rebecca, I'm sorry, go ahead, Rebecca.
I was just saying, this presentation is being recorded, and for those who have not turned in their access request form, and a follow-up letter will be written requesting that permission be granted to sample your residential well for PFAS, and a link to the recorded session will be in that communication.
And Rebecca, if someone has a question about the access form, who should they reach out to for granting access?
That form was developed by Barry Eaton District Health Department. So contact KC or the other staff who are available. You can direct they can direct the questionnaire to the right person.
Well, we do have some Barry Eaton Health Department staff present if anyone would like to make a comment.
Unless we do have a question from one of the residents. Do you mind if I read that now?
Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. I think this one's gonna go mostly to Rebecca, but the question is, will the letter we get with the results give us solutions? I'm thinking if we're positive, our property value will be diminished. So will it just include what the results are, Rebecca, or does it have some perspective as well?
I'm not sure exactly what the format will be with the letter, but we usually have the results posted as to what they are, and most of our letters will include a description as to what the options are. Often filters are placed, and Gary can speak to that as to what the remedies are. There is a plan that we have on file that we'll be following. And as far as property values, I can't speak to that, but it's say you have arsenic in your water, you put a point of use filter on, and you know that's that.
Hey, Gary, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So what our immediate plan and the letters will address are short-term health-based solutions. So how do we get you clean drinking water? If there's a problem, hopefully there's no problem. But if we find some PFAS in your water, how do we make sure that you have clean drinking water now for the next 6 months, for the next year? You know, it's hard to plan long-term solutions when we don't even know if there's a problem. So it would be a case of, let's make sure everybody's got clean drinking water now. If they don't, let's make sure that they have clean drinking water now, and then we'll start looking at long-term solutions, you know, often working with your municipalities and local health department and other agencies that may be involved. So your letter would, if there's PFAS, your letter would have, you know, short-term solutions like we're providing filters, we're providing bottled water, and here's who you would contact. And then we would hold more meetings like these as we develop the longer-term solutions.
Okay. Jennifer, do you have any more hands or any more questions?
Nope, I don't have any more questions or any hands up at this point.
Okay. All right.
Oh, we do have a hand up now. I think Casey would like to comment. So Casey, I'm going to allow you to talk. You might have to unmute your mic.
Awesome.
There you go. I think you should be all set.
All right. I was just going to respond to the resident who wanted to know how to get the form back to us. In the letter you initially received from Eagle, there is an email address, that M. Henry address that was given earlier. And then if you just want help this week with that, you can call me directly, 517-541-2673, and I can help you with that if you don't have email or anything.
Okay, thank you, Casey, for providing that answer and information. No more hands raised. Any more questions, Jennifer?
I don't have any more questions right now.
Okay. All right. Well,
So you know me, if you want me to fill time, I can ask you a bunch of questions. This always spurs on my brain here.
I think they only
Go ahead.
Wes, I would just mention that the MPART website, all the PFAS sites, including this one, are included under site investigations. So, if anyone wants to circle back and get an overview of the site and find information, they can go to the MPART site and it'll be updated on a monthly basis to keep everyone informed on what's happening with the site.
Okay, thank you. Want to provide you, those that are on the list of Eagle contacts. We have Rebecca Taylor with the Remediation Redevelopment Division. Contact information is on the screen. Also David Lebrecht, who is also in attendance this evening. His contact information is also present. I believe Gary Clace has provided his contact information as part of his presentation. I can run back up to that to get that information on the screen. But if you have any questions later and you would like to get some answers to other questions that may come up later, please feel free to reach out to Eagle or to our friends at Department of Health and Human Services, and we'd be happy to answer those questions for you. This is the list of all of the state agencies that are involved in MPART. And this is also the MPART web address, the www.michigan.gov/PFAS RESPONSE, PFAS response. And that will take you to the list of PFAS sites around the state. And you can read up on additional information at various locations. All right, Jennifer, do you have any more?
I don't right now.
Okay.
I was actually trying to figure out how I could share Casey's email and phone number that she provided in the questions, and I can't figure out how to do that. So we'll make sure that when we send the follow-up to everybody that was on tonight, that we include that information as well, just so you have it in writing and it's a little bit easier for you.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, well, I don't want to delay it any further. It doesn't look like we have any additional questions from our attendees. And I would like to, again, thank you all for your attention and your participation this evening. And with that, I think we should, we'll close out the meeting. And again, if you have any questions, Rebecca or Gary or Stephanie may be available to assist you beyond today's meeting. And with that, we thank you and have a good evening.